Today, we're jumping into a huge story about one of Europe's most famous rivers, the Danube. And this isn't just about a river, it's about a massive dream for progress that completely fell apart and turned into this bitter international fight. It literally pitted neighbor against neighbor and ended up in the world's highest court, which had to sort out a legal and environmental mess that was decades in the making.
So let's rewind the clock to 1977. You've got Hungary and Czechoslovakia sharing this incredible river. They sign a treaty to build this enormous system of locks and dams. And this wasn't just some small thing. It was a massive joint investment, a true partnership designed to harness the river for power, for safer shipping, and for flood protection. But that grand vision of working together, it just shattered. In 1989, Hungary, citing some really serious environmental fears, just stopped all construction on its part of the project. So, what did Czechoslovakia do in response? They came up with a pretty radical solution. They decided to dam the Danube themselves and divert almost all of its water into a brand new canal, all on their own territory.
Okay, so you've got an abandoned project on one side and a completely diverted river on the other. It's a total mess, and it leads to the big question: who broke the rules? Who was legally right? Well, that's exactly the puzzle that landed in front of the International Court of Justice. To figure it out, we have to go back to the very beginning.
Right, so to understand where it all went so wrong, we have to look at what the original dream even was. Let's take a look at that 1977 treaty that kicked this whole thing off, the Gabčíkovo-Nagymaros Project.
And wow, the ambition here was just enormous. The treaty called for a single and indivisible operational system of works. I mean, this was the whole shebang. It was a plan to get clean energy, make the river safer for boats, protect the land from floods, and they even promised to protect nature. At its core, it was supposed to be a true 50-50 partnership.
But that single, indivisible project, yeah, it was about to get torn into two. This grand vision started to develop some serious cracks, beginning with a lot of public criticism and political heat over on the Hungarian side.
So after about a decade of work, things just took a dramatic turn in 1989. First, Hungary hits pause on the Nagymaros Dam, pointing to growing ecological worries. Then, just a few months later, they make it official. They're walking away from their side of the project completely. Just like that, the joint venture was broken.
So, how in the world did Hungary justify this? Well, they pulled out a pretty rare legal argument called a state of necessity. They basically claimed the project was an environmental ticking time bomb, that it would contaminate drinking water and destroy fragile wetlands, and that they had absolutely no choice but to stop. The court, however, they didn't really buy it. They agreed the environmental concerns were real, but they said the danger wasn't proven to be imminent back in 1989. And, crucially, the court pointed out that Hungary had other things it could have done, like negotiating, instead of just unilaterally walking away from a treaty.
Okay, so with Hungary out of the picture and billions of dollars sunk into a half-finished project, Czechoslovakia was in a really tough spot. So they decided to go it alone, and they kicked off a really controversial new plan they called Variant C.
Now, Variant C was a pretty audacious plan. It meant damming the Danube way upstream, all inside Czechoslovak territory, and then funneling almost the entire river into their side canal. This would let them run the massive Gabčíkovo power plant all by themselves, basically cutting Hungary out of the benefits entirely.
As you can imagine, this just threw gasoline on the fire. Czechoslovakia starts building Variant C in late '91. By the next spring, Hungary responds by declaring the entire 1977 treaty dead. Czechoslovakia doesn't back down. They dam the river that October. And then, just a few months later, Czechoslovakia peacefully splits into two countries, and the brand new nation of Slovakia inherits this huge international legal fight. So with both countries screaming that the other one had acted illegally, the whole dispute finally lands at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. It was now the court's job to wade through years of broken promises and unilateral moves to figure out who was right.
And the court's verdict was fascinating. They basically found that everybody was a little bit wrong. First up, was Hungary allowed to abandon the project back in '89? The court said no, overwhelmingly. But then, was Czechoslovakia allowed to plan Variant C as a response? The court narrowly said yes, they could plan it. But, and this is a huge but, were they allowed to actually operate it by damming the river? A clear no. The court said that was a step too far because it robbed Hungary of its fair share of the river's water. And finally, was Hungary's move to terminate the whole treaty legal? Nope. The court declared the original treaty was, somehow, still in force.
So think about that for a second. You have this really weird situation where both countries had acted illegally, but their founding agreement was still alive. So the court's ruling wasn't just about who was wrong in the past, it was basically a prescription for how these two nations had to move forward together.
The court's entire argument hinged on this bedrock principle of international law, pacta sunt servanda. It's a fancy Latin phrase that just means agreements must be kept. The court said both Hungary and Slovakia had to act in good faith to achieve the purpose of the treaty, even if the original blueprint was off the table. The spirit of the deal had to survive.
To make that happen, the court laid out a really clear to-do list. They had to go back to the negotiating table. They had to come up with a joint plan to operate the dam that now existed. They had to find a fair solution for the water in the old riverbed. And yep, they had to pay each other back for the damages their illegal actions had caused and settle all the financial accounts.
But maybe the most important, most forward-looking part of this whole ruling was this one powerful sentence. The court said that old treaties don't just exist in a time capsule. They have to be interpreted using modern scientific knowledge and new environmental laws. The court was essentially saying that this 1977 treaty had to be dragged into the modern environmental age, and that set a huge precedent for countries all over the world.
And that really leaves us with a huge question. The court's decision was this landmark attempt to balance development, international agreements, and protecting the environment. And it forces us to ask, in a world that's changing so fast with growing ecological crises, how can we make sure the deals we made in the past can actually help us solve the problems of the future? This case may have been about one river, but its echoes are felt in environmental law all around the globe.